He signed the papers with a smirk, the gold nib of his fountain pen scratching loudly against the document that ended our 7-year marriage. Outside, a blizzard assaulted the glass walls of the 60th floor conference room, smearing the New York skyline into a haze of white interference. Inside, the stillness was total, almost oppressive. Dominic Sterling never once looked in my direction. He glanced at his wrist, admiring the weighty platinum chronometer that cost more than my first car, then immediately lifted his phone. I didn't need to guess who he was texting. Bianca, Aspen, their weekend already planned. There, Dominic said, shoving the papers across the mahogany table without eye contact. It's finished. You have 30 days to vacate the penthouse, Serena. I'm putting it on the market next month. It's too hot to leave empty. He stood, smoothing his silk tie, studying me the way one appraises an obsolete furnishing finally destined for storage. Try something smaller, he added, his tone coated in manufactured sympathy. Maybe a studio near the museum. It suits your dusty little life better. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from right now. Are you in a snowy city like this one or somewhere warm? I'd love to see who is tuning in today. Dominic reached for his cashmere coat, his mind already halfway to the private airfield. In his version of the story, he was the hero, the powerful vice president of development freeing himself from a dull, unambitious wife. He believed he was shedding dead weight. He had no idea he was standing on a trapdoor I had engineered long before our paths crossed. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Judge Keats said. Her voice wasn't raised, but it landed with the finality of a gavel striking oak. She was a woman who had watched empires rise and collapse, and she had no tolerance for men who mistook leverage for divinity. Dominic hesitated, irritation tightening his brow. "I have a flight to catch, Judge. The divorce is signed. We're finished here." "The divorce is signed," Judge Keats corrected calmly, sliding a thick, cream-colored envelope onto the table. "But asset division requires full disclosure of all significant financial changes, and as of 72 hours ago, your wife's financial position changed." Dominic let out a sharp laugh. "What, did your mother leave you her antique thimble collection, Serena, or that Brooklyn brownstone? Keep it. I don't want anything from your side of the family. I just want out." I said nothing. I watched him, the ease with which he dismissed me, my family, and the history that quietly enabled his success. Judge Keats broke the red wax seal. The snap echoed through the room, sharp as bone breaking in silence. "This is the testamentary trust execution for the estate of Victoria Vance," she read, scanning the page. "As the sole surviving heir, full control of the Vance family trust is hereby transferred to Serena Vance." Dominic rolled his eyes, glancing at his phone again. "Congratulations. Enjoy the trust fund." "Can I leave now? The trust," Judge Keats continued, her voice dropping lower, "holds a controlling interest in a diversified global portfolio valued at approximately $180 billion. Dominic's thumb froze mid-scroll. The room seemed to tilt beneath him. "180 billion," he whispered. "That's impossible." "That's sovereign wealth territory. The holdings include the Vantage Group, Highland Logistics," the judge went on, "relentless infrastructure, and a controlling majority stake in Obsidian Capital Partners." The color drained from Dominic's face with startling speed. Obsidian Capital wasn't just a firm, it was the conglomerate that owned his development company, the entity that signed his paychecks, the landlord of the very building we were sitting in. "That's a mistake," Dominic stammered, arrogance splintering. "Obsidian is owned by a blind trust. The board is managed by a proxy, a woman named V. Moore." "Vance," I said. It was the first time I'd spoken since he entered the room. My voice was calm, stripped of the anger he expected. "Serena Vance, V. Moore was just the username." Dominic stared at me, eyes wide, searching for the quiet, compliant wife he thought he knew. "She wasn't there. You hated V. Moore," I continued, leaning forward slightly. "I read your internal memos, Dominic. You called her a dinosaur. A blind relic blocking your ascent because she refused to approve your high-risk zoning shortcuts. You spent 2 years insulting your superior without ever seeing her face. You," he rasped, gripping the edge of the table. "You were on the board. I was the board," I corrected. "You mistook my silence for submission. In a panopticon, the observer stays quiet to study the prisoner's true nature. I wasn't just attending those dinners. I was auditing you, and you failed every test. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was dense, like the air inside a vault moments before the door seals shut. Dominic sat frozen, mouth slightly open, staring at me as though I were a stranger he'd passed every day without recognizing. He struggled to reconcile the woman who organized his socks with the chairwoman who had blocked his riskiest acquisitions for the past 24 months. I watched the realization move through him in waves, not remorse, calculation. He replayed 7 years in his head, hunting for missed signs. He wouldn't find them. He never looked downward. People often assume service equals necessity. They mistake silence for powerlessness. Dominic believed that because I spent my days preserving history in dusty archives, I lived in the past. He called my work quaint. He found my obsession with structural integrity dull. To him, architecture was surface, glass, height, shine. His career was built on what analysts call the glass cliff. He thrived on volatility, chasing high-risk, high-reward bets that dazzled when they worked and imploded when they didn't. Each time disaster loomed, he credited luck. It wasn't luck, it was me. For years, I was the unseen force studying the ladder he climbed. When he pushed the Hudson Yards expansion, I was the anonymous vote that mandated environmental review, saving the firm from $1 billion lawsuit 6 months later. When he tried to gut the pension fund to inflate quarterly dividends, I quietly killed the motion in the early hours while he slept beside me. The dynamic was reversed. He thought he was the builder and I was the accessory. In truth, he was the liability. I was the bedrock. I didn't conceal my identity to trap him. I concealed it because my mother taught me that money distorts vision. It turns love into leverage and loyalty into strategy. I needed to know if he loved Serena the historian or only Serena the asset. He answered that the day he skipped my mother's funeral to attend a strip mall ribbon cutting in New Jersey. Just business, he told me. Sitting in that freezing boardroom, I studied the man who treated my life as collateral damage. He believed he designed our future. He had no idea he'd just handed the blueprints to the demolition crew. Dominic didn't apologize. Men like him don't feel shame, only the loss of leverage. He stood, buttoned his cashmere coat with shaking hands, and left the mediation room without another word. The door clicked shut, and the blizzard outside seemed to erase him. But the war wasn't finished. It was simply shifting fronts. 10 minutes later, seated in the back of my town car as the city iced over, my phone vibrated. A notification from Market Watch, a vicious financial gossip site Dominic read religiously. The headline struck with the grace of a sledgehammer: unstable heir threatens market stability. Is Obsidian Capital's new owner spiraling? I opened the article. Anonymous sources, concerned insiders, a portrait of emotional chaos, a scorned wife acting irrationally. A brilliant executive framed as collateral damage of corporate nepotism. Dominic wasn't named, but the picture was unmistakable. Then the text arrived. It appeared at the top of my screen. Dominic, you may own the building, Serena, but I control the narrative. The board hates instability. If the stock drops 10 points by morning, they'll force a no-confidence vote before you even get your badge. Settle now, take the severance, or I burn your mother's legacy to the ground. I stared at the screen. No betrayal, no panic, no impulse to negotiate, only cold, clinical clarity. He was proving me right. He didn't care about the company. He was holding it hostage. He thought this was a chess match. He believed he could bluff me into folding by threatening the one thing he assumed mattered most, my family's name. He made one fatal mistake. You don't threaten a historian with the past. We know how to dig. It didn't reply to his text. I didn't draft a press release to deny the rumors. I simply opened my laptop and logged into the Obsidian secure server. I typed one email to the head of the IT department. Subject: authorization for level 5 forensic audit. Body: isolate all servers. Mirror the hard drives of the vice president of development. Grant access to the external forensic team immediately. I pressed send. He wanted a war of words. I was going to give him a war of data. Walking into the headquarters of Obsidian Capital Partners was usually a quiet affair. I would sign in at the front desk as visitor, wait for Dominic to finish his calls, and sit on the plush leather sofa unnoticed by the staff. Today the atmosphere was different. It was the difference between a library and a bomb shelter. As I crossed the marble lobby, conversation died, phones were lowered. The security guard, a man Dominic had walked past for 5 years without acknowledging, straightened his tie and nodded to me. He held the elevator open. He knew, everyone knew. The boring wife was now the person signing the checks. I didn't go to Dominic's office. I went to the executive suite and summoned Bianca. She arrived 5 minutes later looking like she was walking to the gallows. Bianca was 26, brilliant at spinning crises, and currently terrified that her career was about to end before lunch. She clutched her handbag like a shield. She expected the scorned wife to scream about the affair, to throw water in her face, to demand details about Aspen. I didn't offer her a seat. I stood by the window looking out at the blizzard that was burying the city. "I am not interested in your personal life, Bianca," I said, keeping my back to her. "I am not interested in the texts, the weekends, or the lies. Those are emotional debts, and I have written them off." I turned to face her. She blinked, thrown off balance by the lack of rage. "I am interested in my company," I continued. "Dominic is using firm resources to run a smear campaign against the majority shareholder. That is corporate malfeasance. If you are involved, you are liable. If you are merely following orders, you are a witness." Bianca swallowed hard. She was smart enough to know that loyalty to a sinking ship is just a fancy way of drowning. "He told me to release the article," she whispered. "He said if we painted you as unstable, the board would panic. He made me draft the press release for tomorrow. He gave me the files." "Give them to me," I said, extending my hand. She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a silver flash drive. "This is everything," she said, her voice shaking. "The drafts, the media list, the strategy emails. He told me to keep a backup in case it locked him out. He said it was his leverage." She thought she was handing over the evidence of a PR war. She thought she was trading gossip for immunity. She had no idea she was handing me the nuclear codes. I took the drive. It felt cold and heavy in my palm. "You can go, Bianca. HR will be in touch regarding your severance." She fled the room. I looked at the silver stick in my hand. Dominic was arrogant, but he was also lazy. He didn't like carrying multiple drives. If he told Bianca to back up his leverage, he hadn't just backed up the press releases. He had backed up everything he was afraid to lose. The forensic audit didn't happen in a boardroom with mahogany tables. It happened in the sub-server room, a space that hummed with the aggressive sound of cooling fans and the invisible flow of data. It was sterile, cold, and brutally honest. Numbers don't lie, they just wait for someone to ask the right questions. I sat next to Kieran, the lead forensic accountant I had hired an hour ago. He was a man who looked at spreadsheets the way an artist looks at a canvas. He had the flash drive plugged into an isolated terminal. "We found the PR files," Kieran said, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the monitor. "Nasty stuff, but that's not the problem." "What is the problem?" I asked. "The drive wasn't just a backup of the smear campaign," Kieran explained, typing a command that flooded the screen with cascading data. "Mr. Sterling did a full user profile dump before he left the office yesterday. He copied his entire My Documents folder. He probably didn't even check what was in the subdirectories." Kieran clicked on a folder labeled Riverside Internal. "I've been cross-referencing his quarterly reports with the raw data on this drive." Kieran said, "Look at this. For the last 12 quarters, Dominic has reported a 98% occupancy rate for the Midwest commercial properties that triggered his maximum performance bonus." He pointed to a column of red numbers on the right side of the screen. "But the actual bank deposit records show rental income consistent with only 82% occupancy." Kieran said, "There is a 16% gap. That's about $4.8 million in missing revenue." "He was phantom leasing," I said, the realization settling in my chest like ice. "He was marking units as occupied in the system to hit his targets, then moving maintenance budgets around to cover the revenue shortfall." "Exactly," Kieran nodded. "He was robbing the building maintenance fund to pay his own bonus. He stripped the assets to paint a pretty picture for the board." I stared at the screen. This wasn't just negligence. It wasn't just bad business, it was fraud. It was a federal offense. Dominic thought he was fighting a divorce battle. He thought he was negotiating alimony. He didn't realize he had just crossed the line from civil court to criminal court, and more importantly, he had triggered the trap I didn't even know was waiting. "Print it," I ordered, standing up. "Print it all and find me the employment contract template from 2021, the one Dominic insisted we use for executive hires." Kieran looked confused, but I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a historian who had just found the smoking gun in the archives. "There is a clause," I said softly, "the Sterling clause. He wrote it himself to fire a rival." It says that any executive found falsifying data forfeits all severance and vested stock options. Dominic wanted to burn my legacy. Instead, he had just incinerated his own golden parachute. The boardroom doors opened with a heavy, pressurized hiss. Dominic walked in, flanked by his lawyer, looking less like a man facing an audit and more like a conquering general arriving to accept a surrender. He threw his briefcase onto the mahogany table, the same table where my mother had signed the original incorporation papers 40 years ago. "Let's make this quick," Dominic said, not bothering to sit. He didn't look at the board members lining the walls. He looked only at me. "My team has prepared the separation agreement, $6 million in severance, immediate vesting of all stock options, and a non-disparagement agreement binding the company from commenting on my departure. Sign it and the blog post about your mental instability disappears. Refuse, and tomorrow morning, I give an exclusive interview to the Wall Street Journal." He leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. "Sink or swim, Serena. Isn't that what I always told you?" I didn't flinch. I didn't look at his lawyer. I pressed a single button on the console in front of me. The lights in the room dimmed and the massive screen behind me roared to life. It wasn't a settlement offer, it was a spreadsheet. Specifically, the raw data from the Midwest region occupancy logs. "Sit down, Dominic," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden darkness of the room, it was the only thing that mattered. He frowned, squinting at the screen. "What is this? This is internal data. You can't show this." "Column C," I said, pointing the laser remote at the red figures. "Reported occupancy 98%. Actual revenue 82%. You've been falsifying the books for 3 years to trigger your performance bonuses. That is $4.8 million in theft, Dominic." The room went dead silent. Dominic's lawyer slowly closed his folder, stepping a few inches away from his client. That's a clerical error," Dominic stammered, his face flushing a blotchy red. "I can explain that. It's creative accounting. Everyone does it. You can't fire me for hitting targets." "Actually," I said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the polished wood toward him. "I can, and I don't even have to pay you to leave." He looked down. It was a photocopy of an employment contract amendment from 3 years ago. "Do you remember this?" I asked. "You wrote it yourself. You called it the Zero Tolerance Initiative. You used it to fire Marcus, that junior VP who threatened your promotion track. You insisted that the board add a specific clause for all executive officers." I read it aloud, my eyes never leaving his. "Any executive officer found to have knowingly manipulated financial data to influence compensation forfeits all rights to severance, deferred compensation, and unvested stock options. Termination is immediate and for cause." Dominic stopped breathing. He stared at the paper. He stared at his own signature at the bottom. "The legal team calls it the Sterling Clause," I said softly. "You built the trap, Dominic. You sharpened the spikes. The arrogance didn't just leave him. It evaporated. This wasn't anger. It was a total structural collapse." He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at his hands, then at the door, then at me, the man who had terrorized the office for 5 years. The man who had called me dead weight suddenly looked very small. He realized that the $6 million he was counting on the money for the condo, the Aspen trips, the life he felt entitled to was gone. He wasn't just fired, he was liquidated. "Security," I said into the intercom. "Please escort Mr. Sterling to the lobby. He has no personal effects to collect." Dominic didn't fight. He didn't scream or make a scene. When the 2 guards stepped forward, he simply deflated, allowing himself to be guided out of the room like a guest who had overstayed his welcome at a party he was never really invited to. The heavy doors clicked shut behind him, sealing the silence. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The blizzard had stopped. Below the city of New York was a sprawling grid of amber lights, a vast ocean of electricity and ambition. I reached into my bag and pulled out the old yellowed blueprint I had saved from the archives, the original keystone drawing of this very tower. Dominic had used it as a coaster for his scotch. I placed it in a frame on the desk. Revenge is a fire that burns everything it touches, including the person holding the torch. But justice is just clarity. It's the rain that washes the dirt off the pavement. I hadn't destroyed Dominic. I had simply applied his own rules to his life. I had removed the rot so the foundation could stand. I looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. I wasn't just a wife anymore. I wasn't just a historian. I was the architect of my own life. In the end, he built a monument to his ego, but I built a legacy. If you believe that true power is quiet, make sure to like and subscribe to see more stories like this. And tell me in the comments what's the one thing you've built that you're proud of. I'll be reading.